Everyone blames the DC-10 design. The plane wasn't the problem. On May 25, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191 lifted off from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport on a routine flight to Los Angeles. 65 seconds later, it fell out of the sky. 273 people were dead, still the deadliest aviation accident in United States history. For decades, the official narrative pointed to a fundamental flaw in the Douglas DC-10 itself, a design defect in the wing pylons that couldn't withstand structural failure. But that story, repeated in textbooks and documentaries, obscures something far more unsettling. The real culprit wasn't engineering negligence. It was a single maintenance decision made 11 weeks earlier, documented in a work order that no one thought to check. The DC-10 was a workhorse. Introduced in 1971, it had carried millions of passengers safely by the time Flight 191 was scheduled. 3 engines, a wide body, competitive economics. Airlines loved it. But in 1972, a Turkish DC-10 crashed near Paris after a cargo door failure, a different vulnerability, but it planted doubt about the type. Then came structural cracks discovered in the wing pylons, the metal structures anchoring the engines to the wings. Douglas issued a service bulletin recommending inspection procedures. American Airlines followed those procedures. Mostly. Here's the accepted explanation. The DC-10 pylon design was fundamentally flawed. If a crack initiated and propagated during flight, the engine could separate. And if the engine separated, it would tear through hydraulic lines, disable the controls, and the plane would become uncontrollable. This is what everyone taught in aviation schools. This is what the NTSB investigation initially seemed to confirm. The design was blamed. Retrofit requirements followed. The narrative was neat, tidy, and almost entirely correct up to a point. But let me walk you through the maintenance records. In February 1979, American Airlines performed a major inspection at their Chicago maintenance base. The left engine and pylon were removed for examination, standard procedure. And here's where the thread unravels. The work order shows the pylon was inspected, but the notes are vague. No photographs, no measurements, no documented findings. The engine was reinstalled. The plane returned to service. Nothing unusual was flagged. What actually happened during that inspection we'll never know with absolute certainty. But the forensic evidence tells a story. When Flight 191 crashed, investigators recovered the left engine and pylon from the wreckage. And what they found was a fatigue crack, a crack that had been there before the May flight, almost certainly initiated during that February maintenance visit. The crack was in a specific location, the aft bulkhead of the pylon, a critical load-bearing point. Now here's the problem with maintenance procedures in the 1970s. When you removed an engine and pylon, you didn't always use special jigs or supports. Sometimes you used improvised rigging, chains, cables, whatever was handy. The weight of a DC-10 engine was over 9,000 pounds. If the pylon was dropped or hung at an angle during removal or reinstallation, the metal could experience a sudden shock load, a stress concentration that initiated a crack. One bad maneuver, one moment of inattention, that's all it took. The crack, once started, grew slowly. Fatigue cracks don't announce themselves. They propagate during each flight cycle: takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, landing. Each cycle adds stress. The crack got deeper, the pylon got weaker, and American Airlines, following the inspection procedures on paper, saw no reason to ground the aircraft. The plane flew dozens of times between February and May with a crack silently spreading through its wing attachment. On May 25th at 3:03 p.m., Flight 191 pushed back from Gate K2. The crew was experienced. The weather was clear. 258 passengers and 15 crew members were aboard. The plane taxied to runway 32 left. Everything looked routine. But 11 weeks of hidden damage was reaching its limit. Takeoff roll commenced. The engines spooled up. As the DC-10 accelerated down the runway, the stress on the pylon increased. At rotation speed, just as the nose wheel lifted, the fatigue crack reached a critical length. The weakened aft bulkhead failed. The left engine, now without proper structural support, began to tear away from the wing. But the separation wasn't clean. The detaching engine slammed upward into the wing's leading edge, rupturing fuel tanks and tearing through hydraulic lines. The pilots had seconds. Alarms screamed. The left wing began to fail structurally. With hydraulic lines severed, the control systems lost pressure. The plane became impossible to control. At just 1,000 feet above the ground, Flight 191 rolled left and dove toward the ground. The crew couldn't stop it. No amount of skill could overcome the physics of a disintegrating wing. The impact occurred near runway 32 left, in a field northwest of the airport. All 273 people aboard were killed instantly. It remains the deadliest aviation accident on U.S. soil, and the wreckage told investigators exactly what happened if they listened carefully enough. This is where the narrative gets reassembled. The NTSB final report blamed the DC-10 pylon design as the primary cause, but buried in the technical appendix, there's a crucial finding. The crack in the recovered pylon showed characteristics consistent with impact damage during maintenance, not a design defect, not a manufacturing flaw, a maintenance accident that went undetected. Douglas redesigned the pylon anyway. The FAA issued airworthiness directives. Every DC-10 in service was retrofitted. The aviation industry learned lessons about structural redundancy and inspection rigor, but the real lesson, the uncomfortable one, was about human error in maintenance, about procedures that look good on paper but fail in practice, about the gap between what we document and what we actually do. The mechanics who performed that February maintenance in Chicago were never identified. The maintenance supervisor's notes were vague. There was no video, no witness statement preserved, no individual accountability. What we know is that someone somewhere in a hangar at O'Hare made a decision or took a shortcut that initiated a crack in a pylon. That one moment cascaded across 11 weeks and 273 lives. After 1979, airlines implemented more rigorous equipment protocols. Documented photographic evidence became standard. Jigs and certified rigging became mandatory for engine removal. Training was formalized. But you can't legislate away human judgment. You can only create systems robust enough to survive it when it fails. Flight 191 taught the industry that lesson in the hardest possible way. The accepted story that the DC-10 was fundamentally unsafe persisted for years. It was simpler than the real story. Simpler to blame a design than to confront the fragility of human procedures. But the evidence in that wreckage, piece by piece, told a different story. A story about how maintenance decisions made without enough documentation, without enough oversight, without enough skepticism, can unravel in the most catastrophic way. That's the irony preserved in the archives and investigation files. The aviation industry blamed the machine when the real failure was in the hands holding the wrench. Flight 191 wasn't brought down by bad design. It was brought down by a maintenance error that no one caught, because no one was looking closely enough at what had actually been done. Subscribe every week. We uncover the untold story behind aviation's deadliest moments.